When Lisa walked through the front door after 5 days away on a work trip, she was exhausted. Her feet hurt from wearing heels at the conference, and all she wanted was a hot shower and her comfortable bed. But the moment she stepped inside, she knew something was different. Her husband David was sitting on the couch with his laptop, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. There were papers scattered all over the coffee table, and his eyes had that excited spark she knew too well. It was the same look he got when he decided to try making sushi at home, or when he bought that kayak they used exactly twice. "Honey, you're going to love this," David said, jumping up to greet her. "I figured it all out." Lisa dropped her suitcase by the door and raised an eyebrow. "Figured what out?" "The garage. You know how we've been talking about turning it into a home gym for months? Well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to renovate the whole thing myself." Her stomach dropped. Their garage was old, probably built in the 70s, and converting it into a proper workout space would need serious construction work. She'd been pricing contractors for weeks before her trip, and every quote came back at around $15,000. It wasn't just about painting walls and putting down some mats. "David, that's a huge project," she said carefully, trying not to sound like she was shooting down his enthusiasm. "There's electrical work, framing, insulation, flooring. That's not like hanging up a shelf." But David was already pulling up videos on his laptop. "Look, I've been watching tutorials all week. This guy on YouTube completely renovated his garage in 3 weeks. He's just a regular person, not even a contractor, and this channel here breaks down every single step. I've made notes, created a timeline, everything." Lisa sat down next to him and watched as he scrolled through what looked like dozens of saved videos. There were tutorials on everything from removing drywall to installing electrical outlets. He'd even created a spreadsheet with a shopping list and a day-by-day plan. "See? I've got this completely mapped out," David said, his voice full of confidence. "The tools I need I can rent from the hardware store. The materials are going to cost maybe $4,000, 5 tops. We'd save at least $10,000 doing it ourselves." "You mean doing it yourself?" Lisa corrected gently. "I wouldn't know which end of a hammer to hold." David laughed. "Okay, yes, myself. But think about it. We could use that extra money for the vacation we've been planning. Or finally replace the washing machine that keeps making that weird noise." Lisa wanted to believe in him. She really did. David was smart and hardworking. He was great at his job in marketing and had a natural problem-solving mind. But watching YouTube videos and actually doing construction work were two very different things. She'd grown up watching her dad work on their house, and she knew how many things could go wrong. "What about permits?" she asked. "Don't we need permission from the city to do electrical work?" David had an answer ready. "I checked. For basic outlet installation, we don't need a permit as long as I'm the homeowner doing the work. I'm not touching the main panel or anything major, just adding a few outlets for the equipment. And the structural stuff? If you're knocking down walls? The garage doesn't have any load-bearing walls. It's a simple box structure. I've already checked the blueprints we got when we bought the house." He had answers for everything. Lisa could see he'd really done his homework, at least on paper. But paper planning and actual construction were different worlds. She thought about the time he tried to fix the leaking faucet in the bathroom and ended up flooding the whole room, or when he assembled their bed frame and 3 of the legs were uneven. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said, choosing her words carefully. "This feels like maybe we should at least get a contractor to look at it first. Get a professional opinion." David's face fell. That excited spark dimmed a little, and Lisa immediately felt guilty. She knew things had been hard for him lately at work. His company was going through restructuring, and he'd been worried about job security. Maybe he needed this project. Maybe he needed to feel capable and in control of something. "You don't think I can do it," David said quietly. "That's not what I said. I just think it's a big undertaking for someone who hasn't done this kind of work before. My dad built our entire deck when I was a kid, by himself. He always said men should know how to work with their hands, how to build things. I've watched him do projects my whole life. There it was." Lisa knew David's relationship with his father was complicated. His dad was old school, the kind of man who believed you weren't really a man unless you could fix your own car and build your own furniture. David had always been more into books and computers, and his dad never quite hid his disappointment about that. "Your dad was a carpenter for 20 years before he retired," Lisa pointed out. "He had professional training." I know. But I'm not trying to build a house from scratch. It's just 1 room, and I'll be careful. I promise if anything feels too complicated, I'll call someone." Lisa looked at his hopeful face and felt herself weakening. Maybe she was being too negative. Maybe he really could do this. People learned new skills all the time, right? And he had been watching a lot of videos. Plus, they really could use that extra money. Okay, she finally said, but I want you to promise me something. Anything. If anything feels dangerous or too complicated, you stop immediately and call a professional. I don't care if we've already spent money on materials. I don't care if your dad would judge you for it. Our safety and our house are more important than pride or saving money. David pulled her into a hug. I promise. Scout's honor. You were never a scout. Details. He laughed and kissed her forehead. You'll see. In a month, we'll be working out in our amazing new gym, and you'll be bragging to all your friends about your handy husband. Lisa smiled, but something in her gut twisted with worry. She told herself she was just being paranoid. David was smart and careful. What could possibly go wrong? The next morning, Lisa woke up to the sound of power tools in the garage. Through the window, she could see David had already been to the hardware store. There were stacks of lumber, boxes of supplies, and rented equipment scattered across the driveway. He was wearing a new tool belt and safety goggles, looking determined and happy. She made coffee and brought him a cup. The garage was already half emptied, with their stored boxes and old furniture piled in the backyard. You started early, she said. Couldn't sleep. I'm too excited. David took the coffee gratefully. I'm starting with demolition today, getting rid of the old shelving and that weird paneling from the 80s. Then tomorrow I'll start on the framing. Be careful, okay? Always am. Lisa went back inside to start her own work. She had reports to finish and emails piling up from her trip. But throughout the day, she found herself distracted by the sounds coming from the garage. Hammering, sawing, the occasional curse word when something didn't go right. By evening, David came in covered in dust and sweat but grinning. Want to see the progress? The garage looked like a disaster zone. There was debris everywhere, and holes in the walls where he'd removed the old paneling. But David was proud, pointing out everything he'd accomplished. See? Day 1 and I'm already ahead of schedule. Lisa nodded and smiled, pushing down the uneasy feeling that wouldn't quite leave her alone. She told herself everything would be fine. David had promised to be careful. What was the worst that could happen? If she'd known the answer to that question, she would have stopped him right there on day 1. But she didn't know, not yet. So she congratulated him on his progress and went inside to make dinner, while her husband stood in the demolished garage, completely confident that he had everything under control. The first week of the renovation project passed in a blur of noise and dust. Every morning, Lisa would leave for work while David was already in the garage, and every evening she'd come home to find him still there, working under the harsh fluorescent lights he'd rigged up temporarily. At first, she was impressed by his dedication. He was really committed to making this work. But by the 4th day, she started noticing things that worried her. David looked tired. Not just regular end-of-the-day tired, but exhausted in a way that went deeper. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he'd started drinking coffee late into the evening to keep himself going. When she asked him about it, he brushed it off. I'm fine. Just want to stay on schedule. I told myself I'd have the framing done by the end of week 1, and I'm a little behind. Maybe being a little behind is okay, Lisa suggested. You're learning as you go. It's natural for things to take longer than planned. But David just shook his head and went back to work. Lisa could hear him out there until almost midnight, the sound of hammering and sawing cutting through the quiet neighborhood. She worried what the neighbors must be thinking. On Friday evening, she brought dinner out to the garage because David said he was too busy to come inside. What she saw made her stomach drop. The framing he'd put up for the new walls looked wrong somehow. Lisa didn't know anything about construction, but even to her eyes, the wooden beams didn't look straight. Some angles seemed off, and there were gaps in places where the wood didn't quite meet up properly. How's it going? She asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Great, David said. But he didn't sound convincing. He sounded stressed. Just a few adjustments to make. The walls look a little uneven. David's jaw tightened. They're fine. The floor isn't completely level, so it makes it look weird. Once I get everything else up, it'll be fine. Lisa wanted to push back, to suggest maybe calling someone to take a look, but she could see the frustration on his face. She remembered her promise to let him try, so she just nodded and left the food for him. That weekend, things got worse. David barely slept. He was up at 6 in the morning and worked straight through until past midnight. When Lisa tried to get him to take breaks, he snapped at her. "I don't have time for breaks. I'm already behind schedule. Do you know how much I have to get done?" "It's just a home gym, David. It doesn't have a deadline." "It has a deadline to me," he said, his voice sharp in a way that wasn't like him at all. "I told myself 1 month. I need to prove I can do this." There was that word again. Prove. Lisa realized this project had become about more than just saving money or having a workout space. It had become tied up in David's sense of worth somehow, in his need to show he was capable. On Sunday afternoon, Lisa noticed the injuries. David came in for a quick lunch, and when he reached for his glass of water, she saw his thumb was badly bruised, almost black in places. "What happened to your hand?" "Oh, that. I was hammering and hit my thumb instead of the nail." "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The bruise looked painful, and when he moved, she noticed he was favoring his left side like something hurt. "Are you injured somewhere else?" "Just sore. I lifted something heavy wrong yesterday. Pulled a muscle in my back, I think." "It's fine." But he winced when he sat down, and Lisa could see it wasn't fine at all. "David, maybe you should take a day off. Let your body rest." "I can't. The electrical supply store has a sale ending tomorrow, and I need to pick up the wiring and outlets. Then I have to get that installed before I can do the insulation, and the insulation needs to be done before—" Okay. Lisa interrupted. She could see he had it all planned out in his head. A sequence of steps that couldn't be disrupted. Just please be careful. The second week was even worse than the first. David took 2 days off work, using his vacation time to focus on the garage. Lisa thought maybe having full days would help him relax and work at a better pace. But instead he just pushed himself harder. She'd come home to find him working in the garage at weird angles, drilling into walls or crawling under the new framing. The space looked chaotic, with tools and materials everywhere. Extension cords running across the floor like snakes, and sawdust coating every surface. One evening, she found him staring at his phone with a confused look on his face, watching a video about electrical wiring. "Everything okay?" He jumped like he hadn't heard her come in. "Yeah, fine. Just trying to figure out this 3-way switch situation. The video makes it look easy, but the wiring in our garage is older than what he's showing. So I'm not sure if I need to do it the same way or differently. Maybe that's a sign to call an electrician." David's face hardened. "I said I'd handle it." "I know, but Lisa, I've got this. Please stop doubting me." The frustration in his voice stopped her cold. She'd been trying to help, but he was taking it as criticism, so she backed off and left him alone, even though every instinct told her something was going wrong. The injuries kept coming. A scraped forearm from catching it on a piece of rough lumber, a small cut on his cheek from when a piece of wood snapped back, splinters in his palms that he'd dig out with tweezers while sitting at the kitchen table, too stubborn to wear the work gloves she'd bought him because he said they made his hands clumsy. "These are just normal construction injuries," he insisted when she expressed concern. "Anyone doing this kind of work gets banged up a little. It's part of the process." But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. These weren't just little accidents. They were signs that David was working beyond his skill level, taking risks he shouldn't take, pushing himself when he was too tired to be safe. By the end of the second week, their house felt different. There was tension between them that hadn't been there before. David was irritable and defensive, and Lisa felt like she was walking on eggshells, afraid to say anything that might set him off. One night, she stood at the kitchen window watching him work in the garage. The lights were harsh and bright, and she could see him moving around, measuring something, checking his phone for the tutorial video, measuring again. He looked frustrated, tired, and stressed. She thought about going out there, about insisting he stop for the night, maybe suggesting again that they bring in some help. But she already knew what would happen. He'd get angry. He'd accuse her of not believing in him. And honestly, she was tired of fighting about it. So she went to bed alone, listening to the sounds of power tools through the walls, and hoped that tomorrow would be better, that somehow David would wake up and realize he was in over his head, that asking for help wasn't failure, it was smart. But tomorrow wouldn't be better. Tomorrow would be worse, and the day after that would be the day everything fell apart. The day she'd see the blood and realize just how wrong things had gone. For now, though, she pulled the pillow over her head to muffle the sound of hammering and tried to sleep. While in the garage, her husband kept working, kept pushing, kept insisting he could handle it, even though the warning signs were everywhere that he couldn't. Saturday morning started like any other weekend day lately. Lisa woke up alone in bed because David was already in the garage. She could hear the sounds of work before she even opened her eyes. The whir of some power tool, the occasional bang of something being moved or dropped. She made coffee and tried to focus on her own work. She had reports to finish for Monday, emails that needed responses and a presentation to prepare. But it was hard to concentrate with all the noise coming from the garage. Around 10 in the morning, things seemed to quiet down. Lisa thought maybe David was taking a break, or maybe he'd finished whatever loud task he'd been working on. She was actually relieved. The constant noise had been giving her a headache. She was typing away on her laptop, sitting at the desk in their small home office, when she heard it. A loud crash. The kind of sound that makes your heart stop for a second. It was followed immediately by her husband's voice yelling a string of curse words she rarely heard him use. Lisa was out of her chair and running before she'd even processed what she was doing. Her mind was already racing through possibilities. Had something fallen on him? Had a wall collapsed? Was he trapped under something? She burst into the garage, and the first thing she saw was David standing by his work table, bent over slightly, clutching his left hand to his chest. He was pale, like scary pale, the kind of white that people's faces get when something is really wrong. David? What happened? He looked up at her, and she could see pain and panic in his eyes. It's fine. I'm fine. Just a little cut. But even as he said it, she could see blood seeping between his fingers where he was clutching his hand. And it wasn't just a little blood. It was a lot, enough that it was dripping onto the floor, creating a small pool on the concrete. That's not a little cut, Lisa said, her voice shaking. Let me see. No, really, it's okay. I just need to... David started to turn away, but he swayed slightly like he might pass out. Lisa grabbed his arm to steady him. Sit down, now. She guided him to the old lawn chair he'd been using as his break spot and practically pushed him into it. His face was getting even paler, and she could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Show me your hand. David slowly unwrapped the old t-shirt he'd apparently grabbed to wrap around the injury. The cloth was soaked through with blood, completely saturated. When he pulled it away, Lisa felt her stomach turn. The cut across his palm was deep. Really deep. She could see it went across 3 of his fingers, too, starting at the base of his pinky and slicing all the way across his palm to his wrist. Blood was flowing steadily from the wound, and the edges of the cut gaped open in a way that made her feel dizzy. Oh, God, she whispered. What did you do? The circular saw, David said, his voice tight with pain. I was cutting plywood. It kicked back. I tried to catch it and... He gestured weakly at his hand. Lisa looked over at the work table and saw the circular saw lying on its side, the blade still visible and stained with red. Next to it was the piece of plywood David had been cutting, with a jagged line where the saw had gone off track. She could imagine exactly what had happened. The saw had bucked or twisted, and David's instinct had been to grab it, and the spinning blade had sliced right across his palm. We need to go to the hospital, she said, trying to keep her voice calm even though inside she was panicking. Right now. It's not that bad. If I just wrap it tight and... David, stop it. Lisa was surprised by the firmness in her own voice. This isn't a scratch. This is serious. You need stitches, probably a lot of them. And we need to make sure you didn't damage any tendons or nerves. She could see him wanting to argue, wanting to insist he was fine, but another wave of blood dripped from his hand onto the floor, and he couldn't deny the reality anymore. He nodded weakly. Lisa ran inside and grabbed clean kitchen towels. She wrapped his hand as tightly as she dared, trying to put pressure on the wound to slow the bleeding. David winced but didn't complain. She helped him to his feet and walked him to the car, keeping his injured hand elevated like she vaguely remembered from a first aid course years ago. The whole drive to the hospital, David kept trying to downplay it. It's probably not as bad as it looks. Hand wounds always bleed a lot. I read that somewhere. But his hand was shaking, even the uninjured one, and the towels she'd wrapped around the wound were already soaking through, red spreading across the white terry cloth like a horrible blooming flower. Lisa drove faster than she probably should have, running a yellow light that was almost red. Her own hands were shaking on the steering wheel. She kept glancing over at David, making sure he wasn't passing out, making sure he was okay. "I'm so stupid," David said suddenly, his voice small. "You were right. I shouldn't have been doing this." "Let's not talk about that now," Lisa said. "Let's just focus on getting you taken care of." But inside she was angry, not just at David for being stubborn, but at herself for not pushing harder. She'd known something bad was going to happen. She'd seen all the warning signs. The exhaustion, the small injuries, the uneven work, his refusal to admit when he was in over his head. And she'd let him keep going anyway because she didn't want to hurt his feelings, didn't want to seem unsupportive. The emergency room was moderately busy for a Saturday morning. Lisa helped David to the check-in desk, where a tired-looking nurse took one look at his blood-soaked hand and immediately moved him to the front of the line. They were taken to a room quickly. A younger nurse came in and carefully unwrapped David's hand, her face professional and calm even though Lisa could see the concern in her eyes when she saw how deep the cut was. On a scale of 1 to 10, "How's your pain?" the nurse asked David. "Maybe a 6? David said, though his clenched jaw and white face suggested it was higher. "Okay, the doctor will be in soon. Try to keep your hand elevated. You're doing good." After the nurse left, they sat in silence. David looked miserable, and not just from the pain. He looked defeated in a way Lisa had never seen before. His whole body seemed to sag with the weight of failure. "I really thought I could do it," he finally said quietly. "I watched so many videos. I planned everything out. I just wanted to prove that I could handle something like this. That I wasn't useless." Lisa took his good hand in hers. "You're not useless. You never were useless, and my dad always said—" "I don't care what your dad said," Lisa interrupted. "Your dad isn't here. And honestly, his opinions about what makes someone valuable are pretty outdated. You're smart, you're kind, you're good at your job. Those things matter more than being able to swing a hammer." David nodded but didn't look convinced. Lisa squeezed his hand tighter. The doctor came in about 20 minutes later. He was older, with gray hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from seeing everything. He examined David's hand carefully, asking questions about how it happened, whether David could feel his fingers, whether he could move them. "You're lucky," the doctor finally said. "It's a nasty cut, but it looks like you missed the major tendons. You're going to need stitches, though. Quite a few of them. I'm thinking around 17, maybe more." David winced. 17? "The cut is deep and it's across multiple surfaces. We want to make sure it heals properly. You'll also need to see a hand specialist in a few days to make sure everything is healing correctly, and probably some physical therapy once the stitches come out." As the doctor left to prepare for the stitching, Lisa watched David process this information. 17 stitches, a hand specialist, physical therapy. This wasn't just a little accident. This was serious. This was the kind of injury that could have been so much worse. "There's something else I need to tell you," David said suddenly, not meeting her eyes. "What?" "This wasn't the first close call. There have been others. I almost drilled into the electrical wiring in the wall earlier this week. Missed it by maybe an inch. And yesterday I was moving a beam and almost dropped it on my foot. It was heavy and I lost my grip, and if I hadn't jumped back fast enough..." He trailed off. Lisa felt anger flash through her. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you stop after those near misses?" "Because I didn't want to admit I couldn't handle it. I didn't want to be the guy who gave up. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, paid more attention, watched one more tutorial, I'd get it right." "You could have been killed," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "If that saw had caught you differently. If that beam had fallen. David, you could have died for a stupid home gym." The reality of that statement hung in the air between them. David finally looked at her and she saw tears in his eyes. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." When the doctor came back to stitch up his hand, Lisa held David's good hand and watched as needle and thread pulled his skin back together, closing the wound that should never have happened in the first place. 17 stitches, just like the doctor promised. Each one a reminder of pride and stubbornness and the danger of not knowing when to quit. They left the hospital 3 hours later with David's hand wrapped in heavy bandages, a prescription for pain medication, and instructions for care. The ride home was quiet. Lisa didn't know what to say, and David seemed lost in his own thoughts. When they pulled into the driveway, they could see the garage door still open, the mess of the renovation visible. Tools scattered everywhere, the bloodstain still on the concrete floor. The emergency room had that particular smell that all hospitals have, a mixture of cleaning products and something else Lisa couldn't quite identify. She'd always hated that smell. It reminded her of visiting her grandmother years ago, sitting in sterile waiting rooms trying to stay hopeful when hope was hard to find. Now she was back in that environment, sitting in a plastic chair next to David, while they waited for the doctor to finish stitching his hand. The nurse had given him something for the pain about 20 minutes ago, and Lisa could see it was starting to work. His face wasn't quite as pale, and some of the tension in his shoulders had eased, but his eyes were different. There was something in them she'd never seen before. Not just pain, but a kind of deep shame that made her heart hurt to look at. The doctor worked carefully, each stitch precise and methodical. David looked away, unable to watch the needle going in and out of his skin. Lisa squeezed his good hand and tried to be strong for both of them, even though inside she was still shaking from the fear of what could have happened. "So," the doctor said as he worked, his voice conversational in that way medical professionals have when they're trying to keep patients calm. "Do-it-yourself home renovation? That obvious?" David asked weakly. "I've been doing this for 25 years. I've seen more DIY injuries than I can count. Circular saws are common culprits." He tied off another stitch. "What were you working on?" "Converting the garage into a gym." The doctor nodded. "Had any professional training? Carpentry classes, construction experience?" "No, just YouTube videos." The doctor paused in his work and looked up at David over his glasses. "YouTube is great for learning how to make lasagna or fix a leaky faucet. But power tools and structural work? That's a different story. There's a reason people spend years learning these trades." "I know that now," David said quietly. "The good news is you missed the major tendons. Another inch or two higher and we'd be talking about surgery and months of rehabilitation. You'd probably have lost some function in your fingers permanently." Lisa felt her chest tighten. She'd known it was bad. But hearing how close they'd come to something worse made it real in a new way. "The bad news," the doctor continued, going back to his stitching, "is you're still going to need serious care. These are deep lacerations across multiple planes of tissue. You'll need to see a hand specialist within the next week, and you're looking at probably 6 weeks of healing, minimum. Then physical therapy to make sure you regain full range of motion." 6 weeks? David's voice cracked slightly, at least. "And that's if everything heals properly and you follow all the care instructions." The doctor glanced at David's face. "You work with your hands? Office job or physical labor?" "Office marketing. That's lucky. You'll probably be able to do most of your work. Though typing will be difficult for a while. No heavy lifting, no repetitive motions that strain the hand, and absolutely no power tools or construction work." "That won't be a problem," Lisa said firmly. "The construction is done." The doctor finished the last stitch and began wrapping David's hand in clean bandages. 17 stitches total. Could have been worse, could have been better. The important thing now is proper care. Keep it clean, keep it dry, watch for any signs of infection. Redness, swelling, fever, any weird discharge. You see any of that, you come back immediately." He pulled off his gloves and sat back, studying David with that assessing look doctors get. "Can I ask you something personal?" David nodded. "Why'd you push yourself to do this? Most people, when they realize they're in over their head, they stop. Call a professional. But you kept going even after what I'm guessing were multiple warning signs. So what was driving you?" The question hung in the air. Lisa watched David struggle with how to answer. She could see him trying to figure out what to say, how to explain something he probably didn't fully understand himself. "I needed to prove I could do it," David finally said. "My dad always said a real man should be able to build things, fix things. I've always been more of a desk person, and I think that disappointed him. When I decided to do this renovation, it felt like a chance to show I could handle that kind of work, that I wasn't just some guy who sits behind a computer all day." The doctor nodded slowly. "And where's your dad now?" "Florida. We don't talk much." So you were trying to prove something to someone who wasn't even there to see it, someone whose approval you're probably never going to get anyway, based on what you're telling me." The bluntness of the statement made David flinch, but the doctor's voice wasn't unkind. "Just matter of fact. I see this a lot," the doctor continued. "People hurting themselves trying to live up to some idea of what they should be. Usually it's an idea that came from someone else, a parent, a coach, society, and they push themselves past reasonable limits because they think stopping would mean they're weak or useless." He stood up and made some notes on his tablet. "You want my professional opinion?" Not just as a doctor, but as someone who's been around long enough to see patterns. This wasn't really about the garage. This was about self-worth. And you can't build self-worth with a hammer and nails. Trust me, I've tried. Lisa saw David's eyes get watery. The doctor's words had hit something deep. You mentioned you were behind schedule earlier, the doctor said. Behind what schedule? Who set that deadline? Was someone paying you? Was there a contract? No, David admitted. I just told myself it should take a month. And when it started taking longer, instead of adjusting your expectations, you pushed harder, worked longer hours, took risks, got tired and sloppy. Am I right? David nodded. That's called burnout. Your body was sending you signals. The exhaustion, the small injuries, the frustration, those were all your body's way of saying slow down, take a break, you need rest. But you ignored all of it because stopping felt like failure. The doctor pulled up a stool and sat down, looking directly at David. Here's what I need you to understand. You're not just dealing with a hand injury right now. Based on what I'm seeing, you're exhausted. Really exhausted. Not just tired from a few late nights. Deep exhaustion. The kind that affects your judgment, your coordination, your body's ability to heal. He pointed at David's face. See those dark circles? That's not just from being up late. That's stress and dehydration and probably not eating right because you were too focused on the work. Your skin is dry, you've lost some weight based on how your clothes fit. When's the last time you had a full night's sleep? I don't know, David said quietly. A week, 2 weeks? And when's the last time you took a full day off, did something relaxing, didn't think about the project? David didn't answer because there wasn't an answer. Every day for the past 2 weeks had been about the garage. Even when he wasn't working on it, he'd been thinking about it, planning it, worrying about it. Your body needs rest, the doctor said. Real rest. Not just sleep, but actual time to recover. You've been running yourself into the ground, and today's accident was the inevitable result. Lucky for you, it was just your hand. I've seen people in your situation fall off ladders, get crushed by falling materials, electrocute themselves, all because they were too tired and stubborn to stop. Lisa felt tears starting to form in her own eyes. Hearing it laid out like this, hearing a professional confirm everything she'd been worried about was overwhelming. The doctor turned to Lisa. He's going to need help for the next few weeks. The hand is going to be useless for basic tasks. Can't get it wet, can't grip things, can't lift anything heavy. Someone's going to need to help him with daily activities. I'll be here, Lisa said immediately. Good. And I'm prescribing rest. Real rest. No work for at least a week, and when he does go back, limited hours. The body heals faster when it's not under constant stress. He wrote out prescriptions for pain medication and antibiotics to prevent infection. Then he printed out care instructions and scheduled a follow-up appointment. One more thing, the doctor said as he was preparing to leave. I want you to think about talking to someone. A therapist, because this pattern of behavior, pushing yourself to dangerous limits, ignoring your body's warning signs, tying your worth to your ability to do physical tasks, that's stuff that goes deeper than a hand injury. And if you don't address it, you're going to find yourself in another situation like this, maybe worse. After the doctor left, David and Lisa sat in silence for a while. The room felt heavy with everything that had been said. Finally, a nurse came in with discharge papers and instructions. The drive home was different from the drive there. Earlier, Lisa had been panicked and scared. Now she just felt drained. Like all the adrenaline had left her body and taken all her energy with it. David stared out the window, his bandaged hand resting in his lap. The doctor was right, he said suddenly. About all of it. I've been so stupid. You're not stupid, Lisa said. You're human. We all have things we're trying to prove. Baggage we're carrying around. You just let yours push you too far. I could have really hurt myself. Or worse. I know. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. You tried to warn me and I got defensive and angry. You were just trying to help. Lisa reached over and took his good hand. We're going to figure this out together. But you have to promise me you'll actually rest. And that you'll think about what the doctor said, about talking to someone. The first few days after the accident were quiet in a way that felt almost uncomfortable. David slept a lot, partly from the pain medication and partly because his body was finally demanding the rest it had been denied for weeks. Lisa took time off work to help him with basic tasks he couldn't manage with one hand. Showering was complicated. Getting dressed was harder than expected. Even eating required some adjustment. David struggled with the loss of independence. often getting frustrated when he couldn't do simple things like button his shirt or cut his food. Lisa could see the embarrassment in his face every time he had to ask for help. By the third day, the pain medication was wearing off between doses, and David was more alert. They were sitting together on the couch, watching a movie neither of them was really paying attention to, when David finally spoke about what had been hanging between them. "I talked to my dad yesterday," he said quietly. Lisa looked over at him, surprised. David rarely called his father. They might talk once every few months, usually brief and surface-level conversations. "What did you say?" "I told him about the accident, about the garage project and the stitches." "What did he say?" David let out a bitter laugh. "He said I should have known better than to try something like that without proper training. Then he told me about the time he built a whole deck in 2 weeks back in 1987, and how kids these days don't have the work ethic or skills that his generation had." Lisa felt anger flash through her. "He said that to you while you're injured?" "That's just how he is. Everything is a chance to point out how I don't measure up." David stared at his bandaged hand. "The thing is, I think part of me already knew he'd react that way. And I did it anyway. Maybe I even did it because I knew he'd react that way." "What do you mean?" David was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot the past few days. About what the doctor said at the hospital. About trying to prove something to someone who wasn't even there. And I realize that's been a pattern my whole life." He shifted on the couch, trying to get comfortable. "When I was a kid, I tried so hard to be interested in the things my dad valued. Sports, cars, building things. But I was always more into books and computers. And every time I'd rather read than help him work on the car, I could see this disappointment in his face, like I was defective somehow." Lisa had heard bits of this before but never laid out so clearly. She took his good hand and listened. "In high school, I joined the wrestling team even though I hated it. I did it because my dad had been a wrestler, and I thought maybe if I was good at it, he'd be proud of me. I was miserable the whole season. Got injured twice. And you know what he said when I told him I wasn't going back the next year? He said I was a quitter." "That's not fair," Lisa said. "I know, but it stuck with me. That word. Quitter. Like the worst thing you could be was someone who stopped doing something hard, even if that thing was making you miserable." David looked at her, and she could see tears forming in his eyes. "I've carried that around for 20 years. This fear that if I can't do something, if I need help, if I have to admit I'm not good at something, then I'm a quitter. I'm weak. I'm not a real man." "Your father's definition of being a man is pretty limited," Lisa said gently. "I know that now, or at least I'm starting to. But it's hard to shake off messages you've been hearing your whole life. Even when you know rationally they're not true, emotionally they still have power." He gestured at the closed garage door with his bandaged hand. "That whole project wasn't really about saving money or having a home gym. It was about proving to myself and to some imaginary version of my dad that lives in my head that I could do it, that I was capable, that I wasn't the disappointment he always made me feel like I was. And when it started going wrong, you couldn't stop because stopping would have confirmed what you were afraid of." Lisa finished for him. "Exactly. Even when I knew I was in over my head, even when I was exhausted and making mistakes, I kept pushing because the alternative was admitting failure, and that felt worse than any of the risks." Lisa squeezed his hand. "But you weren't failing. You were just attempting something you weren't trained to do. That's different, is it though? Because it feels the same. It feels like I should have been able to do it. Like there's something wrong with me that I couldn't." They sat in silence for a while. Lisa thought about her own relationship with David's father. She'd met him a handful of times over the years. He was polite enough but distant, and she'd always sensed his judgment. The way he'd look at their apartment and make comments about how small it was. The way he'd ask David about his job with a tone that suggested marketing wasn't real work. "Can I tell you something?" Lisa said. "I've never liked your father much." David looked surprised. "You've never said that before." "Because I didn't want to make things harder for you. I know family is complicated, but honestly, the few times I've met him, I've thought he was kind of a jerk. He's got this narrow view of what life should look like, and anyone who doesn't fit that view is somehow less than. That's not wisdom. That's just being rigid and judgmental." "My mom always made excuses for him," David said. "She'd say he just wanted the best for us, that his generation showed love differently. But I don't think constantly criticizing someone is love, even if you call it tough love. It's not. Love is supposed to make you feel supported and valued, Not like you're constantly falling short. David nodded slowly. I think that's why I got so defensive when you tried to talk to me about the project. In my head, your concern sounded like criticism, like my dad saying I wasn't good enough, even though you were just being reasonable and trying to keep me safe. I wasn't criticizing you, Lisa said. I was worried about you. I know that now. But in the moment, I couldn't hear the difference. All I could hear was another voice telling me I couldn't do something. They talked for hours that day, about David's childhood, about the pressure he'd always felt to be someone he wasn't, about how that pressure had shaped his choices even as an adult, about the layoffs at his job 6 months earlier and how that had made everything worse. I didn't tell you how scared I've been about work, David admitted. There's been 3 rounds of layoffs. I survived all of them, but I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I've felt so powerless, like I have no control over my own life. I think that's another reason I pushed so hard on the garage. It was something I could control, or at least I thought I could. Why didn't you tell me you were worried about losing your job? Because I didn't want to seem weak. I know that's stupid, especially since we're married and we're supposed to share everything. But there's this voice in my head that says men are supposed to handle things, supposed to provide, supposed to fix problems, not talk about them. That voice sounds a lot like your father, Lisa observed. Yeah, it does. Over the next few days, they kept talking. Sometimes the conversations were heavy and emotional. Other times they were lighter, remembering good times and laughing together in a way they hadn't in weeks. Lisa shared her own fears too. About how scared she'd been watching him work himself to exhaustion. About how she'd felt helpless, knowing something bad was going to happen but not knowing how to stop it. About the guilt she felt for not pushing harder, for letting him continue when every instinct told her it was dangerous. You're not responsible for my choices, David told her. I'm an adult. I made bad decisions and that's on me, not you. I know, but we're partners. We're supposed to look out for each other. You did look out for me. You tried to warn me multiple times. I just wasn't ready to listen. One evening, about a week after the accident, they were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset when David brought up something he'd been thinking about. I think I want to try therapy, he said, like the doctor suggested. Not just about the accident, but about all of this. The stuff with my dad, the way I tie my worth to being able to do everything myself, the fear of being seen as weak. I don't want to keep carrying this around. Lisa felt relief wash over her. I think that's a really good idea. Would you come with me? Maybe do some couples therapy too? I think we need to talk about communication, about how I shut you out when I should have been letting you in. Of course I will. David looked at his bandaged hand. It's weird. This injury is the worst thing that's happened to me in a long time, but in a way it's also given me permission to stop and look at things I've been avoiding for years. Like maybe I needed something this dramatic to force me to deal with my issues. I'm glad you're dealing with them, Lisa said, but I wish it hadn't taken 17 stitches to get here. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The garage sat closed and quiet, the renovation abandoned halfway through. It would need to be dealt with eventually, but that could wait. Right now, what mattered was this. 2 people who loved each other, finally having the conversations they should have had months or maybe years ago. Talking about fear and pride and worth and all the complicated feelings that make us human. It wasn't easy. Some of the conversations were painful, but they were necessary. And as they talked, Lisa could see something shifting in David, the defensive walls coming down. 2 weeks after the accident, David's bandages came off for the first time. The stitches were still in, dark threads holding together the angry red line that cut across his palm and fingers. It looked worse than Lisa had imagined, and she had to work to keep her face neutral so David wouldn't see her shock. It's healing well, the hand specialist said, examining the wound carefully. No signs of infection, the edges are closing nicely. Another week and we can take the stitches out, but I want to talk to you about what comes next. David nodded, staring at his damaged hand like it belonged to someone else. You're going to have significant scarring. That's unavoidable with a cut this deep, and you'll need physical therapy starting as soon as the stitches are out. The hand is going to be stiff. You'll have lost some strength and flexibility. We need to work on getting that back. Will it ever be normal again? David asked quietly. Define normal. You'll regain most of your function, yes, but it's going to take time and effort. And you may always have some limitations, some loss of grip strength, maybe some numbness in certain areas where nerves were affected. Your hand will never be exactly what it was before. The words hung heavy in the air. Lisa could see David processing them, adding this permanent reminder to the list of consequences from his stubbornness. That evening, they finally had to face the garage. They couldn't avoid it forever. Lisa had been paying the rental fees on David's unused power tools for 2 weeks, and they needed to return them. Plus, they had to figure out what to do with the half-finished renovation. David stood at the closed garage door for a long moment before opening it. When he finally did, they both just stared at the chaos inside. It looked even worse after 2 weeks of abandonment. Dust had settled over everything. The bloodstain on the floor had dried to a dark brown. Tools lay scattered where David had dropped them in his rush to the hospital. "I made such a mess," David said softly. "We can clean it up," Lisa replied. "But first, I think we need to call someone to look at what you did. Make sure it's safe." David started to protest, then stopped himself. "You're right. I don't even know what damage I might have caused. The electrical work, especially. I should have never messed with that." Lisa pulled out her phone and started looking up contractors. She'd saved some numbers from her earlier research, back when she'd been trying to convince David to hire professionals in the first place. It felt like a lifetime ago. The contractor they called came out the next day. His name was Tom, a guy in his 50s with weathered hands and a tool belt that had clearly seen decades of use. He spent about an hour in the garage, occasionally making small noises of concern or surprise. When he came back to where David and Lisa were waiting in the kitchen, his face was serious. "Okay, I'm going to be straight with you," Tom said, pulling out a notepad covered in scribbles. "Some of what you did is fine. The demolition, the basic framing in a couple spots, but a lot of it is going to need to be redone." David's face fell. "How much?" "The framing on the south wall is not square. It's off by about 3 inches at the top, which means if you'd tried to put drywall up, you would have noticed it looked weird. That all needs to come down and be rebuilt properly." He flipped a page in his notepad. "The electrical work is the bigger concern. You installed outlets, which is fine, but you didn't run the wiring correctly. In 2 places, you drilled through studs without using proper protective plates. That means if someone had put a nail or screw through the wall later, they could have hit live wires. That's a fire hazard." Lisa felt her stomach drop. David had been working near live electrical wires without even knowing it. "There's also no proper support for one of the overhead beams you installed," Tom continued. "It's just kind of resting on the framing, but it's not secured properly. If you'd hung heavy equipment from it, it probably would have come down. Could have hurt someone." "How much to fix everything?" Lisa asked, knowing David was too discouraged to ask himself. Tom did some quick calculations. "To bring everything up to code, finish the job properly, pass inspection, you're looking at probably $12,000, maybe 14 depending on what else we find when we open up the walls." The number hit them both hard. They'd already spent about $4,000 on materials and tool rentals. Adding another $12,000 to $14,000 meant the project would cost more than if they'd hired someone from the start. "That's more than the original quotes I got," Lisa said. "Yeah, that's usually what happens with DIY fixes," Tom said, not unkindly. "We have to undo the work that was done wrong before we can do it right. It always costs more than starting from scratch." After Tom left with a promise to send over a detailed quote and timeline, David and Lisa sat at the kitchen table in heavy silence. "It cost us more money trying to save money," David finally said. "I've made everything worse." "We'll figure it out," Lisa said, though she was worried too. $12,000 wasn't money they had just sitting around. They'd have to dip into savings, maybe put some on credit cards. The financial stress was real. "I'm so sorry," David said, his voice breaking. "I've screwed everything up. The garage, our savings, my hand, everything." Lisa reached across the table and took his good hand. "Hey, look at me. Yes, this is a mess. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's frustrating. But we're going to get through it. We have each other, and that's what matters most. How can you not be angry at me?" "I am angry. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, but I'm also glad you're okay. And I can see you've learned from this. You're not the same person who started that renovation. That person couldn't admit when he was wrong. Couldn't ask for help. Couldn't see his own limits." David nodded slowly. "The person who started that renovation was an idiot. No. He was just someone dealing with a lot of internal stuff he hadn't addressed. Fear about work, Pressure from old family messages. Trying to prove something that didn't need proving. We all do stupid things when we're running from our own issues. They decided to move forward with hiring Tom. It meant tightening their budget considerably. No vacation this year. No replacing the washing machine. Packing lunches instead of eating out. Canceling some subscriptions they didn't really need. But it also meant doing things right. Tom pulled permits for the electrical work. He showed David what proper framing looked like, explaining why things had to be done certain ways. Not in a condescending way, but in the manner of someone who genuinely loved his craft and wanted to share knowledge. David started going out to the garage while Tom worked. Not to help, because his hand was still healing, but to watch and learn. At first, Lisa worried it would be painful for him, seeing a professional do easily what he'd struggled with. But David seemed fascinated rather than discouraged. Did you know there's a whole science to how you space the studs? David told Lisa one evening. It's not arbitrary. It's based on the weight loads and the materials you're putting on the walls. Tom explained the whole thing to me today. That's interesting, Lisa said, glad to see some of David's natural curiosity returning. And the electrical work. I thought I was following the tutorials correctly, but I was mixing up neutral and ground wires. Tom said if I'd energized that circuit, I could have created a serious shock hazard. Each day brought new revelations about the complexity of what David had attempted. The more he learned, the more he realized how little he'd actually known. But instead of making him feel worse, it seemed to bring him some peace, like he was finally giving himself permission to not know everything. Physical therapy for his hand started 3 weeks after the accident. It was painful and frustrating. The therapist had David doing exercises that seemed simple, but were agonizing with his stiff healing hand. Squeezing a softball, opening and closing his fingers against resistance. Stretching the scar tissue that was forming. It's supposed to hurt a little, the therapist explained. That means the tissue is stretching and regaining flexibility. But if it's sharp pain or if you see any reopening of the wound, stop immediately. David worked at it diligently. Lisa could see he'd transferred some of his obsessive energy from the garage project to his recovery. But this time he listened when the therapist told him to take breaks. He followed the instructions instead of trying to push beyond them. I think I'm learning that more effort isn't always better effort, David told Lisa one night as he iced his hand after therapy. Sometimes the smart thing is to follow the plan someone with expertise has given you. That's growth right there, Lisa said with a smile. They started couples therapy too. Once a week they'd sit in a comfortable office with a therapist named Dr. Chen, talking about communication and trust and all the ways they'd fallen into unhealthy patterns without realizing it. David, Dr. Chen said during one session, you mentioned you felt like asking for help was admitting weakness. Where do you think that belief comes from? And they'd dive back into family history, old messages, learned behaviors. Lisa learned things about David's childhood she'd never known. David learned that his instinct to hide struggles had made Lisa feel shut out and worried. When you don't tell me what's going on, I imagine the worst, Lisa explained, like with the job stuff. I thought everything was fine and you were secretly terrified for months. If you'd told me, we could have been a team dealing with it together. 3 months after the accident, David stood in the finished garage and could barely recognize it as the same space where he'd almost lost the use of his hand. Tom and his crew had transformed it completely. The walls were straight and properly finished. The electrical outlets were evenly spaced and safely installed. The flooring was level and durable. Everything looked professional because it was professional. What do you think? Tom asked, standing next to David and surveying their work with obvious pride. It's perfect, David said honestly. So much better than what I was trying to do. You weren't that far off on some things, Tom said generously. Your demolition was clean, and your instinct about the layout was good. You just didn't have the technical knowledge to execute it safely. David flexed his left hand unconsciously, a habit he'd developed since the injury. The scar was prominent, a thick red line that cut across his palm. The hand specialist said it would fade over time, but it would always be visible, a permanent reminder. Can I ask you something? David said. How long have you been doing this? Construction. About 30 years. Started as a teenager working summers with my uncle. Went to trade school after high school. Been running my own company for 15 years now. 30 years, David repeated. And I thought I could learn it all from YouTube videos in a few weeks. Tom laughed, not unkindly. You'd be surprised how many people think that. The internet is great, don't get me wrong. But there's stuff you can't learn from a video. The feel of when a board is sitting right, the sound of a drill bit when it's about to break through, the way to read wood grain to know where it might split. That's all experience. Over the past weeks of watching Tom work, David had become genuinely fascinated by the craft of construction. He'd started asking questions, really listening to the answers, trying to understand not just how things were done but why they were done that way. "Why'd you get into this line of work?" David asked. Tom thought for a moment. "I like building things. I like that at the end of the day you can see what you accomplished. You started with an empty space or a broken thing and you made it into something useful. There's satisfaction in that. Do people respect what you do?" Tom gave him a curious look. "Some do, some don't. You always get people who think because they can watch a video what I do isn't that complicated. Or people who look down on manual labor like it's somehow less important than office work. But honestly, I stopped caring what other people think a long time ago. I know the value of what I do. My clients know it when their lights work and their walls don't fall down." David nodded slowly. There was a confidence in Tom that wasn't arrogant. It was just solid self-knowledge. He knew what he was good at, and he didn't need external validation to feel worthwhile. "I spent so long thinking certain types of work were more valuable than others," David admitted. "My dad always acted like working with your hands was what real men did. I went into marketing instead, and I think part of me always felt like I'd taken the easy path." "Marketing is easy?" Tom raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't know where to start with that stuff. Getting people to care about a product, understanding what makes them buy things, managing campaigns. That's not my skill set at all. Really, we all have different talents. I can frame a house, but I can't sell it. You probably couldn't frame a house, but I bet you could figure out how to market one. Neither skill is better than the other. They're just different." It was such a simple observation, but it hit David hard. He'd spent his whole life ranking different abilities, measuring himself against his father's narrow definition of competence. But Tom was right. Skills were just skills. Some people were good at physical work. Some were good at mental work. Some were good at creative work. None of it was inherently more valuable. "I wish I'd understood that earlier," David said. "Would have saved me 17 stitches. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Sometimes we have to learn things the hard way. At least you learned. Some people just keep making the same mistakes over and over." After Tom and his crew finished and packed up their tools, Lisa came out to see the completed gym. Her eyes went wide as she looked around. "Wow," she said. "This is amazing. Better than I could have done, right?" David said with a self-deprecating smile. "Definitely. But you know what? I'm proud of you for being able to say that now. 3 months ago, you would have gotten defensive if I said that." She was right. The David from 3 months ago would have felt attacked by that comment. But now it just felt like an honest observation. He had been in over his head. Admitting that didn't make him less of a person. They spent that evening setting up the gym equipment they'd been storing at Lisa's sister's house. A weight bench, some dumbbells, a yoga mat, a stationary bike. Nothing too fancy, but everything they needed. David tried out the equipment carefully. His left hand still had some limitations. He couldn't grip heavy weights as strongly as before. Certain positions caused pulling in the scar tissue, but he could work with it. He was learning to adapt. "How does it feel?" Lisa asked as David finished a set of light bicep curls. "Good. Different, but good. I'm going to have to modify some exercises, but that's okay. The physical therapist gave me alternatives for anything that strains my hand too much." They worked out together for about 30 minutes, testing out the space, getting a feel for how everything flowed. It was nice, comfortable, safe. Everything the garage under David's amateur construction would never have been. Later that week, something unexpected happened. David's company announced they were hiring for a new position, project coordinator for their facilities and operations department. Someone to manage the office renovations and maintenance projects the company had planned. "You should apply," Lisa said when David showed her the job posting. "I don't know anything about construction management. You know more now than you did 3 months ago. And you don't have to be the one doing the work. You'd be coordinating it, hiring contractors, managing budgets and timelines. That's all stuff you're good at." David read through the job description again. It was actually interesting, and after spending weeks watching Tom work, asking questions, learning about the construction process, he found himself genuinely curious about the field. "It would be a lateral move," David said. "Not a promotion, not more money. Just different." Would you enjoy it more than what you're doing now? That was the real question. David had been in marketing for 8 years and he was good at it. But did he love it? Not really. It was fine. It paid the bills. But it had never excited him the way he'd felt watching Tom transform the garage, understanding the logic and skill behind each decision. He applied for the position. To his surprise, he got an interview, and then a second interview. The hiring manager was impressed by his marketing background and his newfound interest in construction. We need someone who can communicate with both the contractors and the office staff, the manager explained. Someone who understands project management but can also talk to the trades in a respectful way. Your recent experience, even though it didn't go well, shows you've been willing to learn. That counts for something. David got the job. When he told Tom the news, the contractor actually seemed pleased. That's great. You'll be good at it. You ask good questions, you listen, and you respect the work. That's what you need in a coordinator. I learned all that from watching you, David said. Then I guess that garage renovation taught you something after all. Just took a painful route to get there. David started his new position with nervous excitement. It was strange being on the other side of construction projects. Instead of doing the work, he was managing the people who did the work. Coordinating schedules, reviewing bids, making sure permits were filed correctly. He found he was actually good at it. His attention to detail helped him catch potential problems before they became expensive mistakes. His marketing experience made him good at communicating project updates to the staff who'd be affected, and his newfound respect for skilled trades meant contractors actually liked working with him. You're different from most coordinators, one electrician told him. Most of them act like we're just bodies doing manual labor. You actually listen when we say something won't work or needs to be done differently. I learned the hard way that people who do this for a living know what they're talking about, David said, holding up his scarred hand. The scar became a conversation starter. When contractors asked about it, David would tell them the story, not to brag but as a cautionary tale, about pride and stubbornness and the danger of not knowing your limitations. I tried to renovate my garage myself, he'd say. Thought YouTube videos were enough. Nearly lost the use of my hand when a circular saw kicked back. Learned real quick that there's a difference between watching someone do something and actually knowing how to do it. Most of the contractors would nod knowingly. They all had stories of DIY disasters they'd been called to fix. Horror stories of electrical fires, collapsed decks, gas leaks from improper appliance installations. David's story was bad, but it could have been so much worse. At home, things continued to improve too. Therapy was helping both David and Lisa understand their patterns better. David was learning to share his worries instead of bottling them up. Lisa was learning to trust. 6 months after the accident, David and Lisa stood in their completed home gym, finally using it the way they'd originally imagined. The morning sun streamed through the window Tom had properly installed, lighting up the space in a warm glow. Everything was exactly as it should have been from the beginning. Remember when you first told me you wanted to do this yourself? Lisa said, adjusting the weight on the bench press. Please don't remind me, David groaned, but he was smiling. That feels like a different lifetime. In a way it was. You're not the same person who started that project. She was right. David caught sight of himself in the mirror they'd hung on the wall. Same face, same body, but something fundamental had shifted. The desperation to prove something was gone. The rigid idea of what he should be had softened into acceptance of what he actually was. His left hand still bore the scar. It always would. The physical therapist had declared him at maximum healing about a month ago. He'd regained most of his function, though his grip strength on that hand would never be quite what it was. He'd learned to work around it, adjusting his approach to tasks that required both hands. The scar had become a teaching tool in his new job. Just last week, he'd been in a meeting with a vice president who wanted to skip getting permits for a small renovation project to save time and money. Let me tell you a story, David had said, holding up his scarred hand, about what happens when you take shortcuts on construction projects. The VP had listened to the whole story. They got the permits. David's phone buzzed with a text from Tom. The contractor had become something of a friend over the months. They occasionally grabbed coffee, and Tom had started referring other clients to David's company. The text read, "Got another DIY disaster if you want to see it." Guy tried to add a second story to his garage. "You should see this thing. David texted back, "Send pictures. I'll add it to my collection of cautionary tales." He'd started keeping photos of bad DIY jobs with the owner's permission. When friends or coworkers mentioned taking on big projects themselves, David would show them the pictures. Not to mock anyone, but to help them understand the complexity of what they were considering. "Just call a professional," became his standard advice. "It'll save you money in the long run. Trust me." Lisa finished her workout and grabbed a towel. "Your friend Jake called me yesterday." "Yeah? What did he want?" "He's thinking about finishing his basement himself. Wanted to know if I thought he could do it." "What did you tell him?" "I told him to talk to you first, and maybe to look at your hand and ask himself if saving a few $1,000s is worth the risk." David laughed. "I'm becoming the neighborhood cautionary tale. Better than being the neighborhood guy who lost his hand to a circular saw." "Fair point." They headed inside for breakfast. The kitchen table was covered with papers. David had been working on something in his spare time, and Lisa had been helping him organize it. "How's the writing coming?" she asked, nodding at the laptop sitting among the papers. "Good, actually. I'm about halfway through." David had started writing a guide for homeowners considering DIY projects, not to discourage them entirely, but to help them realistically assess whether a project was within their skill level. He included safety checklists, questions to ask themselves, and guidelines for when to definitely call a professional. "I think people will find it useful," Lisa said, "especially the section about ego versus ability." "That's important. That's the section I wish I'd read before I started," David admitted. His therapy sessions had helped him understand the psychological aspects of why people take on projects beyond their capabilities. Pride, financial pressure, desire to prove something, family expectations. He'd included a whole chapter about examining your motivations before picking up a power tool. Dr. Chen had been impressed when David showed her the draft. "This is excellent processing of your experience," she'd said. "You're taking something painful and turning it into something that might help others avoid the same mistake." David and Lisa's relationship had strengthened considerably through the whole ordeal. The couple's therapy had taught them how to communicate more openly, how to support each other without fixing each other's problems, how to be honest about fears and worries. "I'm glad we went through this," Lisa said one morning, surprising David. "You're glad I almost cut my hand off?" "No, obviously not that part. But I'm glad we were forced to deal with all the stuff we'd been avoiding. The communication issues, your relationship with your dad, the pressure you were putting on yourself. We probably would have kept limping along, ignoring all of it if something hadn't forced us to face it." She was probably right. Problems left unaddressed don't go away. They just grow quietly until something makes them impossible to ignore. In their case, it took 17 stitches and $12,000 to force the conversation they should have had years earlier. David's job continued to go well. He'd successfully coordinated 3 major renovation projects for his company, each one coming in on time and under budget. His boss had already mentioned the possibility of a promotion to senior coordinator. The respect he'd gained for skilled trades had made him better at his job. He listened when contractors raised concerns. He built in realistic timelines instead of pushing for impossible deadlines. He made sure workers had proper safety equipment and weren't being pressured to cut corners. "You're one of the good ones," a plumber told him on a recent job site. "Actually gives a damn about doing things right instead of just doing things cheap." That compliment meant more to David than any praise from his father ever had. It came from someone who knew the work, who saw David treating their expertise with genuine respect. One Saturday afternoon, David's younger cousin called. He was thinking about renovating his kitchen himself to save money. "What do you think?" the cousin asked. "You did your garage, right?" "Sort of," David said. "Can I come over and take a look at what you're planning?" He drove to his cousin's house and examined the kitchen. Old cabinets, outdated appliances, worn flooring. The cousin showed him Pinterest boards full of ambitious transformation photos. "This is at least a $20,000 job if you hire it out," the cousin said. "I figure I can do it for 7 or 8 if I do the work myself. I've been watching YouTube videos. Doesn't seem that complicated." David felt a familiar sense of dread. He was looking at himself 6 months ago. "Can I be really honest with you?" David asked. "Sure. Kitchen renovations are complex. You've got electrical, plumbing, gas lines if you have a gas stove, structural work if you're moving walls, and then all the finish work. Each of those is a specialized skill. Have you done any of this kind of work before?" No, but I'm pretty handy. I fixed my deck last summer. Replacing some boards on a deck is very different from relocating a gas line or installing new electrical circuits. One mistake with gas or electricity could kill you. The cousin looked skeptical, like David was being overly dramatic. David recognized that look. He'd worn it himself when Lisa tried to warn him. He held up his scarred hand. You see this? His cousin nodded. I got this trying to do a much simpler project than what you're planning. I was careful. I watched tutorials. I planned everything out. And I still almost lost the use of my hand because I didn't know what I was doing. If you take on your kitchen, you're not just risking injury. You're risking your family's safety every time they turn on the stove or flip a light switch. The directness of the statement seemed to land. His cousin looked at the scar, then back at his ambitious Pinterest boards. I just can't afford $20,000, he said quietly. Then maybe the answer is to scale back the project. Do what you can afford to do right. Replace the appliances yourself, that's safe enough. Paint the cabinets instead of replacing them. Put in new flooring. But hire licensed professionals for anything involving electricity, gas, or plumbing. That's not as exciting as a full renovation. No, but you'll still have a kitchen you can use without worrying. It's going to burn your house down, and you'll have all your fingers. That's pretty exciting when you think about it. His cousin laughed reluctantly. You've made your point. I'll get some quotes from contractors, at least for the technical stuff. Smart move. And if you want, I can look over the quotes, help you understand what's reasonable. That's literally my job now. After David left his cousin's house, he felt good, like maybe his painful experience could actually prevent someone else from making the same mistakes. That gave meaning to the whole disaster. Back at home, Lisa was in the gym working out. David joined her, going through his modified routine that accommodated his hand limitations. They worked out in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from being truly comfortable with another person. What are you thinking about? Lisa asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. Just how different things are now. 6 months ago, I was so focused on proving I could do something I had no business doing. Now I'm focused on helping people understand what they actually can and can't do. It's weird how life works out sometimes. You found your calling in the wreckage of your pride, Lisa said with a smile. That's pretty poetic for someone in the middle of a workout. I have depths, she laughed. Later that evening, David had a video call with his father. They'd been talking more regularly since Thanksgiving.